Hi, I'm Keegan. This is a bunch of gamers. Welcome back to GM Talks, and I am joined with Travis Legge.
Hello.
Travis has worked on several Onyx Path properties, as well as I've talked to him about his own games that he has ported from the basic fantasy RPG over to Savage Worlds. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back. And I've had some additional things that have made their way to Savage Worlds recently as well that I would
Oh,
love to get into at some point.
oh, excellent. Yeah,
Um,
I'd love to hear about it. But I've been going through the topic of politics and games. As much pushback as I get from random people who listen to one podcast episode complain, and
sure,
and
sure.
so what kind of I assume some of your own personal politics kind of just worm their way into the games you write and the stuff you write for. And I was just wondering what that kind of process is. Is it conscious? Is it subconscious? When you realize that it's there, do you build upon it? What's the process?
Well, I'm going to start off by saying something that sounds very like sort of pithy and almost dismissive, but is true, which is that everything is political. It's very difficult to exist in an apolitical fashion, at least in the modern world. And I hate to break it to you. I mean, even if you were in, if you're in medieval Europe and you're a serf working the land, you're still having a political existence. You're in that position because of politics, right? So it really is everything. Everything is touched by it. So, uh, would I say that it's for at the forefront of my mind? Not always. A lot of times it is, and a lot of times when it's not, it is informing my decisions just in the way that my politics inform my everyday decisions. Right? If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Um, I believe that it's best for us to do the best that we can to generate as much good for the world around us and ourselves while doing the least amount of harm to others. That sounds like a really sort of middle of the road vanilla approach to existence, but that is a political stance. And in America, not necessarily the most popular one, oddly enough. And it sometimes puts you at odds with people and with other ideologies. And so, like, I can just think of an example that comes to mind when I was working on Dead Man's Rust for Scarred Lands. One of the central aspects of that campaign book, a lot of it takes place in the Gleaming Valley, which is an area of Skarn that is populated by primarily by Hollow Legionnaires. Hollow Legionnaires are a species of beings that are heroic souls that have been mystically bound into armor. So you're kind of like a half ghost, half construct, right? As we were working on that campaign, we sort of all decided that, one of the things we wrestled with was, well, what does gender look like to these people, right? What does gender matter to you? Does gender matter to you if you are a spirit that's inhabiting a suit of armor? How do you interact with that construct, right? And so the idea that some of them might be like, well, this armor has boobs on it, so I guess I'm going to be using feminine pronouns,
All right.
Where others might be like, what difference does it make? I'm a spirit in a suit of armor. Who cares? And they're going to be, non-binary. And some people's identities might not match with the armor they initially bind to, so they just simply switch it up. So the short version of that very long story is that we wound up with, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 30 or 35 NPCs with they them pronouns. Just because we took kind of what we thought was the logical situation normal for the people that we were talking about and extrapolated it out, right?
Yeah. No.
um, yeah, and that's not. I don't think that was a big political statement. I think that was just kind of looking at the way that the fiction had already been set up, kind of combined with the fact that yes, we had a lot of trans and non-binary folks working on the book, so we did have that perspective. But it made more sense to me to go that route. That was a decision that, while there may have been a political implication, that was not the driving force of that choice.
Okay. No, that makes
Um,
some sense.
by contrast, I have a line of games I do for Savage Worlds called Citizens Divided, that is literally about an armed proletariat rising up against the 1% and basically forcing them to hand over a portion of the wealth in a cyberpunk dystopia. So in other words, it's a game. It's 2025 LARP. It's just
Yeah.
walking around in real life.
I
No, we've added some cyberware and some battle armor, but yeah, it's basically.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's like I had mentioned it to Eddie Webb, but I really like the rule zero in Cyborg actually because of that letter of intent that they put in their book where they
See, I
basically
have
say,
not checked out Cyborg yet. So what
"Oh,
is it? What is?
it's you are encouraged to break every single rule in this book except this one. Rule zero. Player characters cannot be loyal to or have sympathy for the corpse, the cops, or the capitalist system. They might find themselves reluctantly forced to do missions for them or their minions, but make no mistake, they are the enemy."
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, that's the politics that where I'm trying to put my politics in would be a game like Citizens Divided, for
Oh,
example.
for sure. Like my werewolf game is that is our actual play is unapologetically political, yet some people never picked up on the tones. I had people come into our fan Discord once going like, "Wow, I didn't think your politics were like this." I'm like, "I don't know how, sir. We have an NPC named Steven whose whole quirk is he murders cops because they harass the homeless." Like, and he's beloved. I
Yeah, it's interesting to me, having been someone who in my teenage years I was a fan of like the World of Darkness, and have subsequently worked on several World of Darkness properties, and the some of the conclusions that some of the fan base draws about the politics of the World of Darkness is mind-boggling to me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how you got to those conclusions. You
it
know?
is kind of wild sometimes, yeah. I think it is true based on some discussions with Eddie that there's probably a kernel of those weird conclusions in there somewhere because people are complicated and we all carry maybe some biases of our upbringing or the society we live in, and it
For
shows up
sure.
in ways that we don't like. But also, when Eddie told me the story about how someone came up to him and basically went, "I really liked your Werewolf the Apocalypse games until you started putting all the weird eco terrorist and like anti-capitalist
So,
stuff in it," and it's like, what?
so first edition,
Yeah, right, yeah,
literally the first book.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's wild.
it is. But no, I've been curious. How do you do something? Do you do similar things at your table then? Like when you run games, I know that you run stream games on Twitch, and I know those are different beasts than your personal table. In either case, your personal table or a Twitch stream, do how do you think your politics affect the stories you end up telling, or even the characters you end up playing?
Well, I mean, uh, again, I would like to think that they're present in the sense that it's something that's a part of my makeup as a human. So it's not usually terribly forced. Sometimes there'll be a specific statement I want to make, but more often it's just sort of like the background noise. Like, again, it kind of wilds me out sometimes because tabletop role playing kind of has roots in the idea, at least to my mind, in the idea of standing up against established power. Of, the heroic adventurers are going off to fight the evil king and the evil king's minions, and that it's not a long journey from that to, when I was running Scarred Lands, the stream that I had on the Onyx Path channel, my players would routinely say "AGAB," all guards are bastards. They extrapolated the city guard was the police, and so on and so forth, and that was the way that they manifested that at the table. I did nothing to fight against that stereotype, but again, I think the root is political. I think stories are better when they are about someone who is under I don't want to say underprivileged necessarily, but someone who is um, at some sort of disadvantage, having to overcome said disadvantage to make the world a better place, whether it be the world writ large or their own personal world. Right? Those at the core and the kernel, I think, are the best sort of stories for a tabletop role playing game. Whether people see that or not, that is an inherently political struggle. You know, the have-nots rising up to defeat the haves and claim what is theirs.
Mm-hmm. Or, yeah, in some cases, just judging off of some old RPG horror stories, and maybe even a few of my old 3.5 games when I was a baby GM, is sometimes ending up in places of power and then kind of just continuing the cycle because it's a fuck you got mine mentality from the players.
Sure, yeah, but I mean, but even that, right? Even
Yeah.
that is an exploration and something of a condemnation of of political structures or of capitalism, as it were, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, you think of most of your people that are playing a very mercenary, self-serving character. Um, I think whether they realize it or not, they're often satirizing that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Oh yeah.
that they're venting through a trope. They're venting a sort of impulse that we all have. Like, I would love to say that I don't have greed. That would
Uh-huh.
be a lie.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
People experience that. So I think exploring that and satirizing it at the table or steering into it in a way that maybe you wouldn't in real life, like that's fine. That there's nothing wrong with that. It's a totally valid play style and experience to have. But again, whether you're doing it out of satire, or out of like a real like power fantasy fulfillment, that is an inherently political decision. So
Yeah.
you can do it and be like, no, I'm doing this because I want the power fantasy. That's fine, but don't sit there and say I'm apolitical with my mercenary character who wants to, steal all the treasure and you know,
Yeah.
like no,
Exactly.
not quite.
Well, and it's always interesting because I've had this discussion on the show before now with others. Is D&D isn't really a medieval fantasy game. It's a western that has an overcoat or a painting of like the it looks medieval fantasy, but like the economic system, how things kind of are portrayed in a lot of these fantasy worlds feels more akin to like a western or like a Greek city state with capitalism kind of bolted onto it than what those kind of societies would actually be, which makes some sense, right? Because like actual feudalism would feel like weirdly alien to play in.
It would be bizarre to play in, and it would also like the level of autonomy that is afforded adventurers would not be afforded to them the same way in an actual feudal state, right?
Yeah,
They would be conscripted and serve, the monarchy effectively,
yeah,
or the local lords at the very least. Like that's
and
how that would go down.
yeah, exactly. And they'd be rewarded with land or food, not
Right,
so
right,
it
right.
it would be it'd be deeply weird. But I do think about that in just kind of an interesting way of how D&D has kind of informed how people think of the medieval world, and how it's not really a good reflection of that, but it's kind of bled into the
It's
fantasy of it as well.
it's really not. And in fact, I think, I mean, it's very hard to like unpack your own biases sometimes, but I don't think, I think medieval is the last period I ever think of when I think of D&D. When I'm thinking of D&D, I'm either thinking of like a pseudo Renaissance that is more in line with the way the continent is portrayed in The Witcher, I suppose, almost,
Yeah, that makes
right?
sense. Yeah.
Or I'm thinking of like a more brutal, like dark, sunny sort of environment,
Mm-hmm.
or like ancient Greek or things along those lines. Medieval Europe is just kind of the last thing I think of when I'm thinking about Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure.
Um, and maybe that is because it doesn't do a great job of portraying it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just,
No, for sure.
uh, it's just not where my mind goes. I do understand why people do, but I think there are other games that are way better. I mean,
Yeah.
we could there's almost always going to be another game that's better at portraying something than Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, there it is. The
But,
spiciest take of the episode.
yeah, right.
Right.
But specifically medieval Europe, I mean, I think
Oh, for
there are
sure.
dozens of games that are better at it. You know, if you
Yeah.
really want to like simulate medieval Europe, go play Ars Magica.
Oh, okay. Yeah, true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. I was gonna say you could play hard master, but you just have to get through the grape nuts level of crunch to actually play the fucking game.
Sure,
Uh,
but yeah, I mean, you got your Ars Magica, you got Pendragon. Like there are games
yes.
that are built for that.
Oh yeah.
Um, D&D just ain't one of them.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. What kind of what were some of the more what were I know you have your new Savage World game, but are there any other games that leap out to you that felt more overtly political that you worked on that you really liked, like getting kind of elbows deep in the politics of?
I mean, yes, there have been a lot of games where I've either drawn some political joy from it or I felt like I was able to make some statements about them. I really had a great time when I was working on Mage the Ascension. And I feel like I got to say a lot of the things that I wanted to say politically about that world and about particularly the role the technocracy would need to play in order to make the world a better place, in order to actually be something of a heroic entity within that world. And to a lesser degree, the traditions as well, though their footing is sort of defaulted to being heroic. And I think one of the most political actions that you can take in the context of a game world is interrogating the inherent politics of that world through either your writing, which is something I've done with Mage, or at your table, which is something I try to do, without. I try to do that in the course of play, rather than being like, this is going to be a game where it's just about interrogating those politics. That's pretty rare, but like, if I'm going to be running a Mage game, the characters will, throughout the course of that game, have occasion to interrogate the politics of their factions. And again, it's the struggle of the haves versus the have-nots. Back in the early '90s when I first encountered Vampire the Masquerade, the entirety of my play group, we built Anarch characters and we fought and railed against the Camarilla, and that was what we just assumed was the default experience for Vampire. So imagine our surprise when we started having a LARP show up in town and it went beyond our table and we started seeing other people playing it. And it was all very like pre-station and Camarilla politics and this, that, and the other. And we were all like, what? You're not blowing up Elysium in your games? That's weird. Um, you know, you want to be Prince? Right on. That sucks. That was kind of like our take on it.
What is it like from The Good Place? You bring in the character that's like, if I ever run into a problem, I just pull out a Molotov cocktail, because then boom,
Right.
I got a new problem.
Exactly. Yeah. It was wild. So I guess to kind of circle back around, I mean, it manifests itself in plots. All but the most simple plot is going to have some element of politics to it. Even the most simple plot. It's hard to isolate, go down in the basement of this inn and kill some rats for 10 gold for me. It's hard to isolate that completely from politics, right?
Yeah.
Because you start wondering why are you not having your employees do this? Why are you hiring what amounts to inexperienced freelancers to go chop up animals in your basement? Wouldn't it be better for you to pay someone to fix your walls?
Right.
You can interrogate these things at a political level, even in the most simple of adventures.
Oh yes, I think that's true. I'd also been talking with others, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this. Is about if I think me and Eddie differ a little bit on this. Eddie thinks that art can absolutely shift politics. I think that art kind of shows possibilities of politics, and simply draws in those who are already receptive to those politics. But regardless, I have noticed shifts in the politics of my players, probably because of the world at large, but there's also this element of with RPGs that's different from other hobbies in that you are essentially, as a group, both the consumer and creator of the art. And I'm wondering if that cycle of creation and consumption allows games to be a better, a decent vehicle for shifting people's politics or giving them new perspective on new political thought that they may not have engaged with as deeply as passively consuming like a book or a show.
Sure. I mean, I think good art demands the observer, it demands the audience think. It doesn't tell the audience necessarily what to think. And in fact, some of the best art does the exact opposite. It triggers thought without taking you on a guided tour of what that thought process ought to be. Look at, like, for example, anything from like a Jackson Pollock painting to a David Lynch film, right?
I was thinking David Lynch immediately when you said that.
Right. Like it's inviting you to think, but it is not telling you what to think. But I think that doesn't mean I think David Lynch's films are apolitical.
No,
no, by any stretch of the imagination, right? So you can be both. You can have that sort of duality or plurality of meaning. I think all art writes the invitation. All art extends the hand and says, let's think about these things that we're going to pursue. And these things could be a labyrinthine plot with heavy politics that are largely inspired and reskinned from the news headlines of the day. Or it could be, why is this innkeeper paying me to go kill the rats in the basement? And anywhere in between that, right?
Or you accidentally predict headlines in your game and you're like, I promise I'm not trying to read headlines and write off the coattails.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's wild. One of the most common things I've heard among my creative, people who are writing for a living, the friends and colleagues, is, I couldn't write this shit. If I did write this, people would think I was, out of my mind. That's too written. That's fake. Nobody's going to believe that. Nobody's going to believe America's going to put 50% tariffs on anybody.
I had a 7 trillion GDP drop happen in my werewolf game like a couple months ago, and I'm like, please not that much, fingers crossed. Like, I'm really sorry, everyone. Like,
yeah,
I had to spoil something for my players because I was like, what the fuck, because that article came out from, I think it was the AP, where they said Elon Musk was going to the Pentagon to talk about war plans regarding China or something like that. And so I filmed my screen and I'm like, hey, I need you guys to see this. Sorry about spoilers, but here's the date I wrote. That was like December or something. I scroll down and I'm like, and this just seemed outlandish and a great way to go, yeah, it's the world of darkness. It's worse than our world. And I scroll down, it's like, America will declare war on China at this date. And I'm like,
yeah, it's truth is often stranger than fiction.
Yeah, as it turns out.
Yeah, but I think though, I think that you can lay those seeds and you can, bash your audience over the head with it as well. But I think the best art sort of invites them to come to those conclusions on their own. And you can certainly nudge people in a direction as well.
Mm-hmm. I think it depends, because I would say, like, I think a good example of bashing that I think produced subpar art, because I think it was a bad movie, was Don't Look Up. I think that I think was a bad movie. But then on the flip side, I actually think the movie Parasite really does kind of bludgeon home the anti-capitalist message. But I also think that's a good movie. So I think you can bludgeon and create good art, if that makes sense.
You can. I think it's almost harder to
For sure.
Deliver a clear and present political message, and serve art. Not saying it's impossible, but it's more difficult than couching it in metaphor. The risk of the more obtuse or obscure the metaphor, the more you risk people misinterpreting it, which I think is one of the things that several games, your Warhammers, your World of Darkness,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, have suffered from historically. Sometimes maybe they did a little too good of a job, satirizing or couching something in metaphor, and the wrong people, or the people with the wrong mindsets, I guess I should say, took a look at it and went, "Oh, that's inspiring."
He's just like me, for
Um,
real, for real.
yeah, like, bro, if you're seeing similarities between yourself and a space marine or a Camarilla sheriff,
Like,
talk to a professional.
yeah, right.
Those aren't people
Yes.
you should aspire to be like.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh, no, I agree. It's actually why I like Werewolf, though. It's very blunt with its politics, but there are some nuances that I think a lot of people unfortunately miss, and I think the new edition threw the baby out with the bathwater on some of those issues. Listen to my 4-hour talk with James, people listening, if that is of any interest to you.
sure,
But
yeah. I mean, and it's like there are levels to the werewolf thing, and I'll just say this. I'm I consider myself friends with James.
sure,
Um, and so that adds a dynamic and a dimension to that experience that like the fans don't necessarily have to wrestle with.
sure,
You know what I mean? If
sure,
that makes sense.
sure.
Because like not only is this just kind of a bad thing that's happened in the industry, but it's like this happened to my friend.
Yeah,
Um, so it's a bummer, to say the least. Yeah, there's nothing I'm going to articulate about that situation that's more
oh,
that's going to be more impactful than what James had to say for sure.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but short story long though is like that's kind of another example of where um, things can go very very sideways very very quickly when somebody is trying to direct the politics of a message in a way that um, maybe it could be perceived as harmful, right?
Yeah,
Um, or not even couching it in soft language that is harmful.
yeah,
Uh, you know, um, so that can go real bad. That can go real bad if people are not thoughtful and mindful and careful.
yeah,
Um, and most importantly, listening to the voices of the people who are affected. I think that's again, this is a thing where like certain people would say, "Oh, that's politics. That's politics." But to my mind, again, putting aside the everything is politics.
yeah.
I think just not being shitty to people is just an admirable quality. I don't think it's
Yeah.
political.
Well, I was
I
gonna
don't think
say,
it's
like,
particularly
I think the equivalent the right metaphor for that, right, is like someone's house gets burned down. You don't interview the neighbor about it. You interview the person whose house went up in
sure, right,
smoke.
exactly,
Like,
exactly, yeah, and furthermore, you don't start a GoFundMe for the neighbor.
yeah,
You know what I
right.
mean? Like you go to the person who's been harmed and you try to mitigate that harm.
Yes.
Um,
No, are
yeah,
there?
and a lot of my motivations in politics are about harm reduction.
Yeah, for sure. I completely understand that. I am not so closeted anarchist, but enough so to get my more conservative neighbors on board with ideas of mutual aid.
Hey, whatever works,
Oh, exactly. You just don't use the scary words, and then they start to listen.
Well, and I have a very, I guess one might say, like a George Carlin inspired streak in me that I don't particularly care for isms. I'm skeptical of people in groups of like three or more.
Sure.
I don't have a ton of faith in our ability as a species to turn this whole thing around. Um, and really, a lot of the activity I take now and the steps I make in my personal life and in my work are about trying to make sure that I can make the world as comfortable as I can for the people I love. And that counts my friends, that counts my family. You know, I have two beautiful grandchildren who I would love to have them be able to grow up in a world where they can breathe the air and drink the water.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
crazy pie in the sky goals.
Right.
Um, but those are the things that motivate me and that I think drive my politics. My my sister is very politically active. She runs a charity in Northern Illinois called the Liam Foundation that is uh, an LGBTQ resource center for Northern Illinois. They initially got started helping people um, just get their name changes and their paperwork together when they transitioned. But now they've expanded to just being like a general resource center, as well as continuing that work. And that work is very dear to my heart, as well as hers, obviously. Um, but the inspiration for that, the thing that drove her to start that, was that her son, a trans man, died by suicide.
Yep.
That's, to my mind, that's the type of thing that motivates someone's politics, is saying this was a harm that could have been prevented. How? Okay. Treating people with respect seems pretty simple. So let's do what we can to ensure these people have access to the respect, the dignity they deserve. And being simultaneously sort of flabbergasted at the people who for some reason have a fucking problem with that.
Yeah. Oh, I get it. Like, couple. So, I didn't know directly anyone who ended up in the Club Q shooting. The ones who ended up passing, unfortunately, were friends of friends, because I used to go to Club Q quite frequently when I was younger. So I got a lot of check emails and all that. And when that piece of shit tried to throw out the "I'm actually non-binary" excuse when he clearly was not, given,
Right.
all the other things behind him. I went to visit my parents. They live up in the mountains, to where it is so red there that it makes other parts of the state look like, fucking Boulder. And this guy starts going, it's like, he's non-binary, so I don't understand how it can be a hate crime. And Thanksgiving got real awkward as my his fists went down, and I'm like, hey man, I need you to shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And his wife's like trying to 86 him, like, you do not need your ass kicked.
Yeah, I mean it's a wild perspective, and it's wild to think. By the way, so what if they were?
Yeah, exactly. So what? Like, you
You
can
know what
still
I
be a
mean?
piece of shit. Like, you can be a
Right.
piece of shit non-binary. Like, you can be a piece of shit and be part of any marginalized group.
Right, and the world that we're fighting so freaking hard for is just a world where we go, hey, this asshole shot a place up, and it doesn't matter. The labels
Yeah.
don't matter. Like that's the ideal world. Those labels aren't important to that fact, right?
Yeah,
Um,
uh,
yeah, But right now, the only labels that they tend to ignore are white and male.
yes.
Um,
But no, it's you're seeing that with some games. I know is I've heard some rumblings from other creative friends, and I know that Onyx Path has always been unapologetically LGBTQ plus. So you may not have as much experience, but like other companies are starting to like tamp down on the trans and the other queer identity like labels in their game, because of this monumental and kind of terrible culture shift that happened in the States.
I mean, if that's going on, I mean, I can't say I'd be horrendously surprised.
Yeah,
It's certainly not going on in the circles that I'm moving in.
that's good.
Obviously I do a lot of contracting with Onyx Path.
Yeah.
And there, I feel confident in saying that's never going to be an issue
No,
at Onyx Path.
exactly.
Um,
I was very like that's one of the reasons I really like Onyx Path. Like,
yeah, I can't foresee that ever being a concern. But if I were to encounter it, I would just leave whatever project. You know what I mean? Like I have no. Don't get me wrong. I am much like anybody else working in this industry, living check to check. So go buy my books, please.
yeah,
But having said that, I will absolutely walk away from a gig if somebody was like, "Oh, you got to tone down the non-binary characters in this," or something along those lines. "Oh, you can't have a trans woman in this thing."
yeah.
That would probably be my resignation.
Well,
Um,
fair enough. I mean, that is
yeah.
admirable. That is, I understand. Like, I won't judge anyone who has to like maybe tamp it down a little bit, especially if they're part of a marginalized group, simply because you got to eat. But
Oh yeah, yeah. Let me be abundantly clear here. I do not hold anyone to like the moral standard I hold myself, in part because I recognize that everybody's struggle is personal, right? Everybody's journey is personal. I don't know what somebody else is doing, and I say now, I would just walk away. And
yeah,
I can't imagine, like, I mean, I can't imagine a circumstance shift in which that would change, but who knows?
yeah,
Maybe I get real, maybe I get real desperate. Maybe my grandson gets sick and I need some money,
yeah.
and I guess, well, I guess I'm gonna suck. I guess
No,
I'm gonna suck it
exactly.
up and deal with this
It's
thing, right?
no, we
So
all
I don't
live.
judge when people do that. Yeah,
Yeah, we all live under the reality that is capitalism, and the it's good to have principles, but you also can't eat them.
right,
Like,
right, and
that's not an excuse to like just go. Well, if you can't eat principles, better just fuck you get mine, obviously. But it is
right.
like
Yeah,
let's be clear there. Like,
that's the thing that I think is missing from a lot of the nuance of the conversation is there is a gulf of difference from um, being this like pure principled everything I do is moral and fuck them like there's
yeah, yeah,
there's a pretty
yeah,
broad
exactly.
spectrum between those two positions
No, no,
and
exactly.
we've polarized ourselves, at least in America, we've polarized ourselves to the point that we pretend that spectrum doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well,
But
it's
I tell
actually
you,
what. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I mean, I was born and raised in fucking rural Wisconsin, okay, and those are the people, I went back home a few years ago. A friend of mine's mom got sick, and I went back to Boston and visited. And a lot of the people that I met with are, I'm sure people who voted for Trump. Um, but they love each other. They pull together as a community. When one of them is hurt or sick, they, bring a dish to pass, or they, slide them a few bucks or whatever, help them work on their car, so on and so forth. It's not like the idea of community is vacant from, the conservative side of the aisle. It's just, I think it's based on exposure, right? If you're out in the middle of nowhere, the family the friendship the community is isolated. You're not interacting with people of a diverse background every day, so you don't recognize that they're really kind of part of this larger human family.
I think there's
Um,
some truth to that. I would push back only a little because, this is just my observations of growing up in rural Colorado. Right,
mhm.
is there is this desire to other in a way that makes your life feel less shitty without actually being able to make it less shitty through policy.
100%.
And I think my father spoke of this a while ago. He grew up in South Boston, and he would go to Roxbury sometimes, which South Boston's very Irish American community, and Roxbury is a very black community near Boston. And he talked about his Great Aunt Irene, and he's just like, oh yeah, Great Aunt Irene was pretty racist. And he talked about her, and he said basically, she's like, hey, we don't have a pot to piss in, we can't put two pennies together, but at least we're not black. It was
Right.
that specifically that was being said by her that made my dad go realize like a lot of people are super racist because that's the only way they feel they can be better than someone.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The othering as a means of coping, or as a means of, yeah, like you say, sort of being better than whoever is lower in the food chain than you are, which is also a terrible impulse. But I think that's an impulse that's driven into us again by capitalism.
Oh, for sure. I would say that our current views of race and gender, especially, are very much informed by capitalism as a way to prevent working people from working together to like not get screwed over so hard.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely about separation, and there's also sort of the white Christian nationalist ideal of, uh, this sort of weird, like Handmaid's Tale, sort of like,
Yes.
women need to be baby factories right now because we're running out of white people, which is just fucking absurd.
Yes.
Like on multiple levels, and that's one of the hardest things that I have in terms of like trying to reach out to people and discuss political beliefs and find common ground, because somebody will say some shit like we're running out of white people, and I'm like, I don't know what to say to you.
Yeah.
You have the, you know cognitive skills of a fucking potato. I don't know how we're gonna
Yeah,
have this
well,
conversation.
right. It's a cult thing, right? Like, it's basically how I viewed it is, if you want to put the effort in because there's someone that has meant something to you, for a long time, and you're seeing the culty behavior that is current American conservatism, probably previous conservatism. I can only speak to the zeitgeist that my brain is able to track right now.
Sure.
Is right is it's a cult thing. You have to do a lot of steps. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of listening. It's a lot of hearing and saying shit you might not necessarily agree with to slowly move that person out of that dark place to where they feel safe in a way to view what they did previously as bad. And
Right.
like there's like and for some people like in my life it was just like man, I don't like you that much, and I only have so many hours in the day.
There's that, and like, one of the, me and several of my friends have remarked over the past few weeks about how, like, if the revolution's going to pop off, it needs to pop off by like June, July, because my knees just aren't up to it. I mean, we're all
Right.
getting old. And, we're going to have to be cheerleading from the sidelines pretty soon, which is also fine, and that's something that I think people need to start finding some peace with, is that you can serve the purposes that you can serve.
Yeah.
You can do the best that you can do. And sometimes your best is 30% of your best, but that's your best that day, you
Yep.
know? And you can't reach everyone, and you can't decolonize or, rehabilitate everyone. You can try to be a welcoming force. You can try, if you've got the capability and the knowledge, to meet someone where they're at and try to bring them out of that sort of cult like uh, behavior, or cult like adherence to their dogmas. Great. But if you can't do that, don't beat yourself up over it. You know what I mean? Like, you got to make sure that you're eating and staying hydrated and taking your meds and doing your exercise and living your life, because you're no good to anybody if you're not maintaining you.
Yep.
Um,
And always just constantly learn yourself, because I mean, you got to grow. Like I grew up in a place, and you mentioned like you did, you grew up in a place that was like pretty far from where we are currently at, but it doesn't mean that we don't have a lot further to go based on just, things we grew up with that, have yet to be examined.
Oh, sure. And, I'm extremely leery of anybody who thinks they have an answer, too,
Oh yeah.
uh, more and more, like, I tend to vote Democrat because, um, the alternatives tend to either be monsters, or just ineffectual, right? Uh, do I agree with the Democratic Party? No. In fact, I kind of despise most of what they do. There's about 5 Democrats that I actually like. um, you know, but again, it's about harm mitigation, right? Who's going to do the least amount of harm?
Oh,
Then
for
we can
sure.
start worrying about, then we start worrying about making the world a better place. Let's slow the descent into hell first.
Uh, I think
Um,
I think her name is Aloranati. Yeah, Aloranati. I think that's her YouTube channel. Um, she says it best. I think it is when you vote, you're not voting for someone to bring change to the world. You are voting for your um, weakest adversary to get what you want because change comes from the people, not politicians.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And, and another thing that I've been wrestling with, a revelation, a realization I've been wrestling with, and boy, I would sure love if somebody could prove this wrong to me. Um, but realizing that change does not come nonviolently. Nonviolence is absolutely a part of it. I think protest is important. I think activism is important. But I've also been in the same room as a history book,
Yeah.
and and I know that by itself, don't I can't think of a time it's ever done the job on its own. Um, you know, we like to popularize in this country all the beautiful things that Martin Luther King Jr. said. But we tend to shy away from the more, uh, one might say, radical actions that he took, or radical speeches that he gave,
Agreed.
because we want to promote this idea that, oh, if you're just peaceful and you ask nicely long enough, the people in power are going to have no choice but to listen to you,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just a fairy tale.
Yeah. No, it's a specifically it is the system basically takes what it wants from certain movements and then satirizes the rest of it in a way that it seems naive. And so after MLK became lionized, he got absorbed into the cultural zeitgeist with all the you know, the nonviolence, the speech, the pretty speeches, all that, and then the satirizing parts they attached to some of his contemporaries who
Right.
were maybe more radical to try and satirize that in a way that makes that seem uh, unpalatable.
Right. When the reality of the situation is that everybody that was involved with that had a part to play, and it
Exactly.
was the combination of those efforts that led to actual action. It's the same
Mm.
thing. Pride was a riot,
Yeah. Uh,
and when you and I hate to break it to the powers that be right now, but when you criminalize it, pride's going to be a riot again.
mm-hmm.
you
Yep.
know?
I Are you familiar with the book How to Blow Up a Pipeline?
No, but it
So
sounds like a fun read.
it is a good read. It's actually it posits an interesting question. I did it to read because, as it turns out, I take some of the game when I take focus in on one game. I may hyperfixate to an absurd degree. So I grabbed some nonfiction books for ecology or environmentalism, and the book is an exploration as to why are there not more eco terrorists,
Okay.
because he points out that climate change is existential, it's ever growing. In other situations where it's nothing's being done, there tends to be more terrorist actions that happen, but that has not been happening with environmentalism. And so he kind of goes through that, but he also points out, he goes, nonviolent, he goes, I do believe in nonviolence, but I need to specify, if you blow up property and hurt no one in the process, I view that as nonviolent.
Right, right.
And
So
so,
it's nonviolence with an asterisk.
yeah, exactly.
Um, right, and that's, to me, that's a semantic argument.
Oh, for sure.
I get what they're saying, and that's cool. And don't get me wrong. Once again, my guiding star is harm reduction. I don't want to see people get hurt.
Sure. No, agreed.
I would love a way to avoid that, but you know, when you what's that? There's a famous quote that now is escaping me, but basically what it boils down to is when you make, you know, violence the only option, violence is the option people are going to take.
It's if when you
You know,
make peaceful protest impossible, you make violence inevitable, I
violence is
believe.
inevitable. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yes, that one. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like the truer words never spoken. That
Oh
is
yeah.
very accurate.
Oh, but yeah, it's
Um,
a great book. He talks about how they went to Hummers and in Sweden and then just emptied their tires and then put big signs on their windows to let the driver know, hey, your tires are empty. It's because you drove this gas guzzling piece of shit, and you should reconsider and get a new car.
nice.
But it's a very good book. I guess last kind of question before we wrap up and I let you get back to things is I know you're on the writing side, but with the current tariffs and things like that, how much do you think real world politics is going to impose itself on the tabletop industry, given that most books are printed in China or distributed out of there, like from Drive Through RPG and things like that? I know you might not be on the side, but do you foresee that there might be a shift to more digital products for a while?
Oh, I would assume so. There are some companies that I really do believe this is going to be the last nail in the coffin for because they were not prepared for this in any way, shape, or form. And that's a real shame. I
Yeah,
think there are other companies that have had an eye on it for a while and will make adjustments and will weather the storm. It's not going to be easy. They will
yeah,
need to change some things up. Um, I don't think anybody's going to come out of this unscathed, but I also am trying to remain hopeful without veering into naivete, right?
sure,
Because one thing that it's real hard to keep sight of, and this is because of deliberate actions by the powers that be. Um, it's only been 2 months.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's only been 2 months. They're doing a bunch of insane shit right now, um, and slowly but surely, as happened the last time, um, the checks and balances are falling into place, and people are pushing back, and things are, you know, I don't want to say correcting themselves because that's an overly optimistic view. Um, but mechanisms are falling into place to try to stand against the most egregious injury being dealt by the government. Now, are these happening quickly enough? No. Are they happening at a broad enough spectrum? Absolutely not. But things are coming into place, and I do think that if we can band together and we can keep that pressure going, we can start shifting things back in a more reasonable direction. And I think that can be that will include, trying to undo some of this damage. Now, I don't know that our trade relations haven't been permanently damaged by this. I think they probably have been. So I don't know that it's ever going to get as good as it was, but I think it will get better. And I think that will be because we will force it to get better. And an interesting thing, I was just speaking about this with my wife. This tariff issue has, I really think, been possibly Trump's first actual misstep with his cult. Because in the last 24 hours, I've heard Ben Shapiro and Joe Rogan talking about how bad these tariffs are. And if they're giving voice to that on their huge platforms, I think that sentiment might start to rise. Because I'm not 100% convinced that this cult that we like to attribute, the MAGA cult that we like to attribute to being followers of Trump, I don't think they're really followers of Trump. I think they're followers of Trump's mouthpieces. And those are your Shapiros, your Rogans, those folks. So if those folks all stand up and go, "Hey, wait a minute, this ain't right, this ain't good," I think he loses the MAGA movement.
okay,
And
that's
my hope
fair.
is
Oh,
that's what's
oh.
going to happen. You
Yeah,
know?
for sure. No, 100%. That is the hope. The one I'd heard is the only saving grace to everything is that Donald Trump is an idiot. And if this fascist takeover could have been 1,000 times worse if he took his time. If he took his time, no one would have noticed. It could have been done if the federal employee dismantling happened over a span of 2 years. It would have
Oh
been
yeah.
a slow rollout. It would have been over. But because
Well,
they jumped on it right away, that caused everything to spike up to where hopefully it is a big fingers crossed, and to people to continue to like protest, mask up, hide your face, and don't bring your cell phones to those, but continue to protest and like push back in a way that is meaningful.
100%. And on the other side of that coin, and a thing to keep in mind is, I think at least I am of a generation, and I think we're pretty close in age. So I assume maybe you are as well. I'm of a generation where we were sort of sold, even in our history books, that the Nazi regime and the fascist regime in Italy were these efficient machines of well constructed competence that were turned to evil, and that's just a fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
The Nazis were just as incompetent as the MAGA movement, perhaps more so. um, and they didn't have to contend with a populace that was quite as communicative as
Mm-hmm.
us, which might be our saving our bacon.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, there's a real like fascist movements tend not to be terribly competent.
they tend to.
They tend,
That's why they only last so long. Yep.
yeah, and that is a definite fortunate thing for us. But yeah, I'm really hoping that by doing these tariffs over the objections within his own uh, circles, I hope that Trump has shot himself in the foot and spent enough capital that now those people who've enabled him may shift their position.
Yeah.
And like I said, if Rogan starts routinely critiquing Trump, that's a real big problem for Donald Trump.
Yep.
you know.
Agreed. But do you have any closing thoughts, Travis, before I let you go?
Oh, just be nice to one another, please. The world is dark. Try to be the light in somebody's life. Play fun games. Say nice things to people. It costs you nothing to be a decent human being. So just try. And you're gonna screw up. I screw up. People screw up. When you screw up, own that you screwed up and try to move on and do better and just be a good person.
Yep. All right. Hey, thank you, Travis, for joining us once again. I've been Keegan. This is A Bunch of Gamers. You can find us on Facebook, Blue Sky now, YouTube, Podbean, and several other places. But I was never on Twitter, and I never will be, because it's a cesspool, and I was proven right. Bye.
See ya.